The homework's due tonight before 11:59. I did look, and it does look like some people actually finished it and turned it in already, so that's good. I just had a few questions. I do want to emphasize again that it's really important to do the reading because some of the homework and then also on the exams, it's going to assume you did the reading. And if what's in the reading is really complicated, and I think that it needs to be explained, then I'll put it in class. But if I think by doing the reading that you'll pretty much understand it, I may not even mention it in class. And so the whole idea there is to not surprise. I don't want to surprise you with anything. I just want to make it efficient. So if I feel like it's something you're probably going to get if you read it, and I'll put it in the assigned reading. With that said, if you read the assigned reading and you have any questions, you can put them in Piazza, or come by the office hours. I will tell you, I'm not going to do the reading. I'm going to do the reading, but I'm not going to do the reading for you. So if you ask me a question and I think that it's in the reading, then I'm going to direct you to the reading. One of the things that I do, I want you to remember this, so I'm going to tell you a little story. So one of the things that I do is I serve as an expert witness in federal litigation. These are cases between typically companies in the United States over patents. And part of what I have to do is testify as an expert witness in court. But before I can testify as an expert witness in court, I have to have an opinion. And my opinion has to be a written opinion. So I get all these documents, literally like thousands and thousands of pages of stuff that I have to read through and sort through. Then I have to write a report. And my report usually is like maybe a couple hundred pages long. And then I get to add like attachments and things like that. So sometimes, like the last time I did this, I get deposed on my report, which means that I sit in a room and there's a lawyer that's asking me questions, and there's a video camera, and there's a guy that's like taking notes like this, and they're recording me. And if I say something, whatever I say is under oath. So if I say something like, if I lie, I'd go to jail, basically. But if I say something wrong, for sure it's going to show up in court because the other side is trying to undermine my credibility. So one of the questions I often get, and I got last time that I did this, was they wanted to know where within my report, which was a couple hundred pages long plus exhibits, my opinions were on certain specific things. And so what I told them was, well, sir, my recollection is that at least the majority of my opinions on this topic are between those pages, 157 and 167. He said, well, I need to know where all of your opinions are. And I told him, well, all my opinions are within the report. He said, but your report's 200 pages long, and it's got all these exhibits. So I want to know, like, where your opinions are for this topic. I said, well, sir, to the best of my recollection, there are between pages 157 and 165. But I spent a lot of time writing my report. And so all of my opinions related to it are within the report. He was not very happy about that. But I wasn't very happy about writing that whole thing, so I want to make sure someone read it. Now, in retrospect, what you all have in your assignments are short. If you find that it likes taking a long time to read something, let me know, because it's not my intent. And if I make an assumption that you're going to be able to read something and understand it, and my assumption's wrong, then it's your responsibility. Let me know. You say, I tried to read it, but I just don't get it. And remember, the book's yours if you want to keep it, so you can highlight it and say, I just don't understand this, or what, this seems contradictory, and I'm happy to go over it with you. So I spent a lot of time on that, but it's mostly because I want you to succeed in the class. And if you don't do the reading, you're probably going to make things unnecessarily hard for yourself, basically, is the short version. Okay, I'm going to try to start with a quote every time we have a class. This quote is from a gentleman named William James. He did not win the elite prize in computer science, but he was a professor and fairly well known in the fields of psychology and philosophy from Harvard. And what he said is, we can make decisions. Well, he didn't say this, but the point is, we can make decisions. We have free will. And if you believe that, then what he says is, act as if what you do makes a difference, because it does. And that may seem kind of silly, but there's actually a lot of very intelligent people, and I'll quote from them in different parts during the course, that have and still do believe that we actually can't make decisions. That everything that you do today is determined based on what happened before. And so that even if you decide you're going to make a decision today and you're going to go after class a different way home than you went, then these people would argue, well, no, that was actually going to happen because Professor Melendez said this in class, and you wanted to prove that you can make your own decisions, so you walked some different way home. So act as if what you do makes a difference, because it does. So if we do have decisions, if we don't have decisions, then the rest of the class isn't really going to help you much, because we're going to talk about today decisions, and the reason we're going to talk about decisions is so that we can understand how humans make decisions, again, so that we can program computers to make decisions in a way that humans do. I do have one other footnote, again, by a question that was asked. There was the required reading that we aren't going to talk about in class for a while, and that was the influence tactics. These were, I think, 27 things. And someone had asked me at the end of last class, they were a little concerned because they felt like they did some of these things, and that's okay. So I want to say, so if you missed the announcement, it's okay, but I definitely don't want you reading this and identifying that you do some of these things and thinking that you're disturbed, because it's actually, the reason I put this up here is because we all do, okay? But very important, if you do find that you are doing this like all the time, then I'll give you my normal disclaimer, which is, go see a counselor or a doctor about it. In all seriousness, if you find like it's just to such an extent that you're constantly doing these things, then people call that, or it could be a sign of an issue, because you're constantly trying to manipulate things and not really acknowledging the world that you live in. But very few people fall into this category. I would say, actually, if you don't identify any of those 27 things, then there might be a problem, because those are things that we influence. Okay, so it is normal if you recognize that you exhibit several of these, and it's normal if you recognize that others do. And one of the things I want you to think about, if you've read it, is what changes when we are more aware of the influence tactics of others. So if you have read it, I'd encourage you at some point to reread it, certainly before the first exam, and to think about to yourself, what, now that I've read this and I'm maybe remembering some of these things, am I noticing them more? That's really what I want you to do, because I think that will help you learn them. So if you notice that other people are using some of these things, that's a good thing. So, but what I'm curious about later is now that you're aware of some of these things, does it really make any difference in terms of how you interact? All right, today we're going to get into decision making and artificial general intelligence. The next, this class is, I call it hard because to me it's a little boring. So I'm just going to be upfront with you. The process of making decisions and analyzing models is something that's I find a little bit tedious. So I'm going to try to make it a little bit fun for us today in class today because it's really important. The next class is a lot more fun, which has to do with occurrences and reality. So, and we'll get to that on Thursday. So these are the classical steps for decision making. If every decision that you make in your life you applied this process to, you probably wouldn't make hundreds or thousands of decisions every day. But if you go to business school or take project management courses, you're likely to see a graphic that looks something like this, okay? So I want to go through this with you because it is sort of a baseline for how we make decisions. To the extent that we can make decisions in this fashion by following these steps, it's really, really good because from an implementation standpoint, you can write code. If this is our model and it's a 7-step model, then we can write code that helps us identify what the decision is, or maybe that can be an input into the system. We can write code that gathers information that's relevant to making that decision. We can write code that identifies alternatives, assigns and calculates weights to the evidence. We can choose that alternative and recommend an action. So we can write code that says, hey, this is what I want to decide. And you can kind of see how software would come back and say, well, this is what I think you should do, the recommendation engine, right? In a way, this is what happens when you drop something into a search engine like Google. You give it an input, it does its weights and all these things in the back has to figure out, and it's going to give you outputs that it thinks are going to be relevant to you, right? So if you have a system that works in this way, that's good. So that's why I want to show you this, because if as you understand more how to model and write code and analyze software related to how humans work, some of what humans do may work in this way, and so you want to identify it so you don't make your life more complicated. Okay. So we're going to walk through this. I have some friends that are visiting. It's a married couple. Does anybody know where they're from? What? Excellent, excellent, from Ukraine. They're the ones that brought me these candies. Okay. So the decision I have that I want to make, and I'd like your help today in making, is where should I go to dinner with them tonight? Okay. The answer is not at home. So I'm not going to cook dinner tonight at home. Hopefully the answer is not San Juan, but let's see what y'all come up with in this, because I have to be here tomorrow bright and early at 8 a.m. Okay. So it's also not Paris, France, unless you're lending me your jet, and then I'll do it. Okay, so the first step is the decision. I'm giving that to you as an input, which is where should I go out to eat dinner tonight? Now we're going to gather information. I filled in a little bit of information. It may or may not be completely relevant. I put, there is a married couple visiting us from Toledo, Ohio. Okay. B, they are originally from Ukraine. C, she cannot eat gluten. She actually has something called celiac disease, which means she's not just eating it for fitness reasons or things like that. She's very allergic. So if she eats gluten, she's going to be sick for several days. So we're gathering information. I at least have a D, E, and an F here. What else do you think would you like to know to help you help me in this process? What? Budget? Budget. I would say the budget is unconstrained, given it's in my list. That's not normally going to be the case, but I actually like my friends, so I don't mind treating them to something, whatever it is. You guys are going to decide if it's pleasant or not. We'll see. Next question. Excuse me? Has to be open tonight. I'm not getting out of here till, so I'm available, let's say, after 7 p.m. I don't think there's, well, yeah, let's see here. I really would like to be eating. They should at least, the kitchen should be open between those hours. So sometimes they close the kitchen at 9, but the place is open until midnight or something like that. At least within this, I'd say not at least, within this range. Because after I leave here, I'm going to go get them. So I know I'm not going to get there before 7, but I need to eat before 9, so I have time to digest them. What else? Distance? I would say Maya West. Maybe let's put a. I would say really, approximately, say no more than 21-minute drive from here. That's going to take out Rincon. That is going to take out Rincon. So it doesn't have to be Miami West, but I don't want to drive too far. Okay. Any other things? I can add another one if you. Yes. I'm open to suggestions. We're open to suggestions. So I'll put that here. Open. So there's no constraint on theme. Okay, so we have some constraints here. It's a married couple, so there's going to be female, male. So whatever restaurant has to allow both genders. They're originally from Ukraine, not necessarily constraint, but could be a factor. If there was a Ukrainian restaurant in Miami West, maybe that would be interesting. She cannot eat gluten. It's a pretty important constraint. Budget is unconstrained, given it's in Miami West or in this within a 21-minute area. Kitchen's got to be open between 7 and 9, so they got to take our order to eat in between that time frame. All right, let's move on. Okay, so we've gathered some information. Now let's identify some alternatives. Costa. Okay. What? Plaza? Did you say plaza? Like that? Platos y copas. Okay. I know some of you aren't from around here. What is it called? Hacer hacia Italia. Okay. Any other choices? What? Rock and go? Like that? Rock and go. Like that? Okay, awesome. Anybody else burning with one more? Okay. All right, so we have some alternatives. Now we're going to go to the next one, and we're going to weigh the evidence. What's the evidence? Okay, I'm going to bowl this over because I think it'll be helpful to us. Well, put that here. Okay, so how are we going to weigh this evidence? What are some of the factors? We got some inputs. We gathered some information. We have some alternatives. Remember, the next step is we're going to choose, right? So what's important about what?
Well, I have no idea what any of those things are, but just like the HPAI, I would think to go for the issues.
Okay.
Maybe just one thing.
Okay. So to the extent there's if Italian food, then maybe less options, less gluten-free options. That's an excellent one. Excellent. Okay. So if we wanted to go there, we'd need to check to see if they have gluten-free pasta or something. What else might be important in this decision? What's that? Reviews. Okay. What reviews would you trust? But of which service, or is that you're agnostic? Google. Okay. Okay. One more. What else should we weigh making this decision? Yep. Okay. So I said this was a max, but obviously if it's a little closer and it's just as good, then that could be good. Huh? Oh, I like that one. Good. So that we can maybe see before how many options they're likely to have. Anything else? Pictures. Pictures of what? Of everything. Everything. Okay. Okay. That's pretty good. All right, so now it's time to choose amongst the alternatives. The alternatives were here. So how do we make that choice? You need more information? Well, presumably any of these will fit the criteria, right? With the exception of what was mentioned a little while ago, which is if they just can't do anything gluten-free, which could potentially happen, or if they can't run their kitchen in a way that they can't guarantee, or even themselves, that they could do something that was gluten-free, because it's not that she would just not enjoy her meal, she would get sick, and we would let them know that when we walked in. Okay. Anybody have a strong preference on these restaurants?
Maybe a good question to ask us, like, which one, where have you gone to in any of those?
Personal recommendations.
I have never been to any of those, so like I can't.
I'm gonna put that. Where was that? There. So personal review. Okay. Awesome. So I take it none of you have relatives that own restaurants in Married West, so they either would be or wouldn't be on here. Okay. Now, what do we learn from this process? Well, you could have recommended places that you went to. Right? So my wife, I don't know if you call it a restaurant, but she likes this place called Cariños, which is like a little food truck that's underneath the little underpass. But I don't think that they're out there too early. I'm not sure. You wouldn't recommend it. Okay. So part of so this process can work. In this particular case, there really wasn't necessarily a right or wrong answer, right? And so you could argue, do I really need to go through this process? Turns out they've actually been here a few days. They're going to be here a few more days. So we could actually just kind of pick something. And probably any of these four places would work. Maybe not the Italian place. We have to see what the Asian place, maybe they would have sushi and things like that with just fish. So maybe that would work. But to apply this, one, it takes time. And so a lot of times people just don't do it because they don't want to spend the time to do it. And they make something called a gut decision. They say, well, I heard someone said this restaurant might be good. Let's just go there and see. The downside is it's not the end of the world. Someone mentioned that Asia Italia is close to Costa. So if we went to one and there was nothing on the menu, then we could theoretically just get up and drive over to the next one unless we got there kind of late. But in order to apply this process, it requires not only time, it requires a very clearly defined problem. You need to know what it is you're trying to solve. It also requires, generally I put works best, but it also generally requires that there be certainty in terms of what you want to accomplish, certainty in terms of what the alternatives are. You have to be able to gather the information that you need to make the decision. And it assumes that's available. And then it's based on an applicability of rational decisions. So you could have said, well, when we were talking about information in order to weigh alternatives, you could have said, well, have you considered flipping a coin? And maybe that would be a way to determine an outcome, right? So when you're applying this process, you're assuming that you're going to make a decision based on logic and so on. So again, this is something that's fairly common in terms of an approach to making and coming to a decision that's taught a lot and used a lot. The first time I saw this, I was probably roughly your age, and it made sense to me. But then in reality, every time it's, I've tried to use, not every time, but many times when I try to pull this out and say, oh, let's just try to figure out how to do this. I find that there's just too much uncertainty to use this approach. Okay. So instead what I do, and what is normally done by humans on a day-to-day basis, and the reason it doesn't normally take them 20 minutes to figure out where they're going to go to dinner, is that we use heuristics. And you can actually teach computers to do this too. Instead of calculating the exact answer, you can also teach computers to estimate an answer. And that's essentially a heuristic, okay? You can do that in cases where maybe you're not converging on the right answer, your algorithm's not converging on the right answer, or on a final answer, I'm sorry. But it's within a certain bound. And you can see that as the program continues to try to find an answer, it's never settling on an answer, but all the answers are within a certain tolerance of an amount. And so you might say, you know what, I don't know what the answer is, but let's just apply a heuristic that says if it's varying within a certain amount of an answer, let's call that the answer, even if it may not exactly be the answer. Okay, so heuristics are shortcuts that we apply as humans, and computers also apply if algorithms are used to do that. I strongly suggest in your life as coders, or wherever it is you decide to do with your education in computer science, that you recognize this, because in many cases, it doesn't really matter if you get the exact answer. What matters is that you get an answer that's good enough. And in those cases, often you can apply shortcuts to get to the answer that will run far more efficiently in software. Okay, so heuristics is the fancy word. It's also known as mental shortcuts, rules of thumb, educated guesses, intuitive judgments, common sense, and maybe blind luck. I don't know. Okay, it's basically something that you're doing. You may not fully be able to explain why, but it tends to lead to a good result. Okay. Some heuristics in terms of finding a restaurant might be, I'm just going to drive past where there's a bunch of restaurants and look for one that has a bunch of people in it. Okay. It can be a rule of thumb that suggests that if there tend to be a lot of people in the restaurant, then maybe it's pretty good. May not be. Could be they're having a special that day, and so a lot of new people are coming to the restaurant to try it out. And so we as humans, generally, when we make decisions, we don't go through that process. We may like to think we went through that process, okay? But we don't go through that process. So as you, again, think about yourselves and about humans and how we make decisions, recognize that heuristics are a really important part of that process. And it's good, and sometimes it's not so good. It's good in the sense that it allows us to get to correct answers fairly quickly, okay? It's also bad, or not so good, because it can lead us very quickly to an incorrect answer, and a very hopefully incorrect answer, because a lot of times heuristics have assumptions built into them, okay? So you'll hear this word mental shortcuts oftentimes described by people who are talking about biases and prejudices. They assume because someone looks a certain way that they either have some economic means or don't have that economic means, or that they're either intelligent or they're not intelligent. Okay? So those are mental shortcuts. I suspect that you do these things because as far as we know, everyone does these things. Okay? What's important is that you're aware of when you're doing this in cases where maybe you're seeing that it's not coming up with the right answer, okay? Okay, so we've talked about processes that are very methodical, and to the extent that there's something that we're trying to understand within the human system that follows that methodology, then it's great to use that kind of a model. Okay. And to the extent that there isn't, then you want to find what model is going to work, and some of that may include heuristics. Now, as promised, is this not really that exciting, or is it? I don't think it's that fun, but do you all think it's okay? Good. It's useful, but again, I don't want to lose you on it. Sometimes we're going to go through things in class that are like more exciting than not. So if you find this exciting, then that's really great. Very useful. If you have any questions about it, feel free to come by office hours. Now we're going to jump into the brain. I've got a short video here that's going to go through some, I'll call it simulations. It's really highlighting where activity is in the brain, okay, as you're making decisions. So we're going to see a video on decision making here. Trying to get better at switching between stuff.
What happens in your brain when you make a decision? How can you make better ones? From choosing a cereal to finding those like that as safety. Science writer Jordan Lehrer tackled decision making small and large in his book, How We Decide. Whenever you make a decision, there's an argument taking place inside your head. And sometimes the argument is between rational areas, the prefrontal cortex, and through areas like the amygdala, the common areas that generate these powerful emotions. And so the key in terms of making the right decision is figuring out how to reconcile those arguments, which side you should listen to. Neuroscience shows that successfully choosing a cereal might lead to more emotional areas of the brain. What about life and death decisions? There's also a how-to-learn emotional argument taking place when in a very stressful situation. It's hard to imagine more stressful situations being a cockpit with total engine power over decisions. Yes, there are because your keeper in first shows the self-surgery by torso wars. They will automatically turn on. Those are pumping out intense feelings of fear and anxiety. Those pilots trained to do what they trained to do flight simulators is how to keep a limit on those emotions. How to make sure those emotions don't get out of control so the fear doesn't turn to panic. First strike, you lost all engine, you lost the front engine, you turn your T29 changes, you lost nothing all engine, beat that. Got it. Work in practice is because it's think through those feelings. And that requires the prefrontal cortex to be included in gray areas. And so the case of Captain Sullivan, what that allowed him to do was take a deep breath to realize that his fear wasn't going to save him, that his fear wasn't useful. So that we have to do is look at the airspeed indicator, its altitude, look how far away the runway teeter and journey was, or whether I can return to the warrior, and realize that the best decision you can make at that moment was to land on the Hudson. Sounds very much a rational thing. In many respects, the plane is like a Swiss Army knife. It's stuff full of all these different tools, these different ways of thinking. You can rely on the amygdala, which is the tongue, the prefrontal cortex, and by using that cognition, you really tailor the thought process to the task at hand. So it's learning about how we think to allow us to think better.
We're actually, if we have time today, we're going to do one more video, and I brought a speaker for that one to see, because it's, if you thought this one was low, the other one, the volume's a little low. Okay, so what was the first decision that they made in that video? They showed two examples of decisions. What? Emotional what? Someone raise their hand, so because it sounds like a lot of people have it. Okay, so what was the first decision that was made? Cereal? Between cereals, right. And then, like was mentioned, when they did those studies, they saw that parts of the brain that tend to be associated with emotions tended to be more active. So that suggests when you're choosing cereal, you may be choosing cereal based more on pleasure or some feeling that, hey, this is gonna, eating this cereal, Cookie Crunch or whatever the cereal is, gonna make me feel good, right? What was the second decision then that they went into? What? Which was where to land the plane, right? And you saw, at least from the simulation here, because they weren't doing a brain scan on the pilot, that initially the same part of the brain, or maybe some similar parts that were involved in making the cereal decision, wanted to be involved in making some kind of decision because they were projecting out this fear and this anxiety, right? In that case, what they're suggesting the pilot did was to not focus on as much on the emotional thinking part of the brain, the emotional part of the brain that was helping make the decision about cereals here, and thinking, well, I can't really focus too much on that because I have to focus more along the lines of that, you know, the steps that we saw, right? You know, what I have to do, I want to live, and I think the people on the plane want to live, right? So that's my objective. Let me gather some information, right? So they gathered some information. How many engines were out? Both engines were out, right? To me, it's impressive actually when I hear the video that everybody on the video, it sounds to me calm. Like he didn't say, if I was hit up in here, I'd say, both of them, all of them are out. You know, what are they going to do? I'd have been freaking out. That's why I don't want that job. Right? They said, both. How many are out? Both are out. Oh, okay. I mean, I didn't see, I don't know about y'all, but I didn't sense a lot of emotion in that video, right? But I suspect that all these people are trained to know that, hey, when stuff's going on like this, like, you know, we have to focus on facts. I need data. I need to gather information. I need to know what my options are, right? If one engine was working, he probably wouldn't have landed in the river, right? Okay. So it's interesting. I really like this video. And by the way, before I show you a video, I spent a lot of time looking at videos because I want to get something that's an efficient use of your time. And I found that this was relatively short and showed you two high quality examples. There might be times when you choose cereals in life not based on emotion. Okay. And then why is that? Why might you not choose a cereal based on emotion? Huh? There you go. Maybe you're watching your weight or your health and you want to limit sugar intake. Right? Now, you still may have emotions while you're making that decision. Okay. This morning when my alarm went off at 5:45, I knew I wanted to go out and practice dancing. I told you one of the things I do is I dance hip hop and reggaeton. I do that at 6 o'clock in the morning. So every morning I go through this emotional debate, right? And I can tell you that my emotions are saying, stay in bed, hit the snooze button, okay? Sometimes they went, today they didn't. Today I got up, and actually after I got up, emotionally I felt good. So it's kind of interesting that I went through emotional responses at first before I got up and got going that were like, you know, sort of negative feelings that I felt were actually trying to keep me in bed and sleeping. And then once I got up, washed my face, started getting dressed, I actually was pumped. I was excited about going outside and playing some music and dancing. Okay. So some of you have turned in your assignments, some of you haven't. I'll be interested to see if any of you tackled emotions as one of the things that you consider important if someone wants to understand you. And then it doesn't mean you had to, so don't go. You don't have to worry that you submitted already, but it'll be interesting to see because that's obviously a tough one. Question? there's definitely a lot of calm in that video. Absolutely. Yeah. There was a movie about it. I don't know if I didn't actually see it, called Captain Sully. This is just a chart to show you nothing more than it's complicated. So basically, the way we make decisions, I'm not going to tell you here everything that happens because no one actually knows. Okay, so there's been a lot of thinking that certain parts of the brain are involved in creating certain emotions. Now science has shown that that's not true. That basically, maybe for the most part, if someone's angry, they might have some activity in certain parts of their brain, but if you look at 100 people, you're not going to get the same result. So our brain is very dynamic. You'll learn that when you read through that emotion But I like this graphic just because when I look at it, it seems very complicated. But it does show areas that are at least actively involved in different things. We do know that the back of the brain is actively involved when you see things and processing vision, which at first to me seemed a little odd because your eyes are up here. But there's processing that goes on in your brain as the signals make their way from your eyes all the way back to the back of your brain. And then the amygdala, which they mention, is sort of in the, if you drilled all the way into the middle and then connected up through here, that seems to be very involved in emotions. And that actually makes sense because emotional responses have things to do with the body, right? Our heart rate might go up, you might feel tense. So it kind of makes sense that the part of the brain has a good connectivity to your body and then also is central to the brain. And then when logic is going on, that tends to be the front part of your brain that tends to have more activity. But again, I don't want you to think that when you're thinking about something logical, that the rest of your parts of your brain are sleeping and things are just happening here, because that's not the case. Even when you're dreaming or you think you're not thinking about anything, to some extent, the entirety of your brain is active. Okay? We're going to shift gears now, but what we talked about is making decisions that would be called somewhat rational. We talked about making decisions that are maybe a bit more spontaneous or heuristics, and in those kind of heuristic ones, where maybe we can't really explain it based on logic, maybe emotions are more involved in those. We don't know where we want to eat, but makes us feel good to think that we're going to go to this place. I've done that before, where I've made a decision to go somewhere, and I just had this feeling like I didn't really want to go there. And so sometimes those heuristics can help you make decisions that are going to make you feel good, or avoid decisions that aren't going to make you feel good, even if you didn't follow some logical multi-step model to get there. So now we're going to talk about AGI, and that's the last thing we'll hit on today. Has anybody heard this phrase before? Artificial general intelligence? General intelligence. Okay. In a way, it's kind of good, although this is the phrase within the industry, if you will, that's meant to describe what's next after deep learning, AI, or the kind of artificial intelligence that we have today. But it's kind of good that you haven't heard of it, because in a way, I find it to be not that helpful a phrase. When I went and searched for to see if there was some consensus on a definition so I could present that to you, I actually found very little in terms of consensus on a definition. You can read through some of those. I've highlighted some of it. Something that can perform an intellectual task that a human being can, an intellectual task. So in a way, they defined artificial general intelligence using the word intellectual. There's no a real intelligent system. So as opposed to one that's just artificially intelligent, an artificial general intelligence one is that's really intelligence, not just that kind of seems like it might be intelligent. I underlined this one because I thought it was interesting in that it seems to presuppose that whatever ends up allowing us to get to some higher level of intelligence is going to be a computer. And I would challenge you to not necessarily presume that it's going to be a computer. In fact, as you went through your homeworks, and I'm going to get to read your homeworks, I suspect that I'm going to get a lot of different answers for question number 1, which was something related to what's missing from artificial intelligence. And that's because there's a lot of things that are missing. So one could argue at a high level, well, computers could be artificially intelligent. Then why are current implementations missing so many things that we think are important for intelligence that's more humanistic? There's another one at the bottom that says it's going to be software proofs. So I suspect this was written by a hardware person and this one by a software person. I'm not sure. So for this class, we're not going to resolve what the definition of artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence is, but I've created a definition that we can work with. As the course goes along, I'm totally open for suggestions if we want to improve this definition. I tried to keep it simple. I also tried not to use any of the words that we're trying to define. So I put artificial general intelligence consists of a non-living system characterized by its wisdom. So if you're writing this down, that's good, because there's a lot that goes into that meaning. So this definition, if it's correct, if you want to test it, then we would say, okay, that means that there isn't an artificial, if there is no AGI, artificial general intelligence, then there is no artificial intelligent system today that we would say is characterized by its wisdom. We'd say that's a wise system. Does anybody think of a system that's wise? Huh? I'm sorry. I didn't get that. So, so I don't think that there is one. If there is one, then we need to rethink this definition or award the prize to that, whatever that system is. There's certainly systems that know a lot, right? We talked about Está bien Google. And it knows a lot, but you wouldn't really say it's wise. It's wise. It has wisdom. So what does it take to have a system that has wisdom? Well, we're looking to answer that question by looking at human beings and how human beings interact. And there's 4 categories that that people are exploring today with respect to artificial general intelligence. And they are biological, cognitive, what I call psychological, and the 4th is social. And I'll go through these again on the next slide a little bit. But biological is literally looking at the neurons and the chemistry in the neurons, and not just the electrical interactions and physical interactions, but chemical and biochemical interactions, and building really complicated models in computers. And so you can sort of think about that as neural networks to the nth degree of complexity. Okay, so whereas a neural network might have nodes, and those nodes may be connected to other nodes, and there may be weights, and there may be feedback mechanisms. The nodes here have orders of magnitude more things going on within each node. Okay. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that in this class, but I wanted you to know that's there. Cognitive and psychological are more related to thoughts, so and behaviors, and then social is more related to what's called macro behavior. And what that means is all of us do things, and we can sort of watch that happening, but over time, what impact does that have? So if we do something today as a class and that has some significant impact later, then that's something that maybe is a more social kind of thing. And this is a good way of looking at it. This chart was put together by a guy named Newell and adapted by Professor Dubinsky, who's at MIT, I think. No, he's at Northeastern, sorry. And I think this is helpful in terms of thinking about these different ways of approaching the problem of AGI, of artificial general intelligence. And so again, remember we spent a lot of time on models. In AGI, if you're working in the biological band, you're building models that are keeping track of what's happening inside the human body on the time scales of fractions of seconds. So anywhere from 100 microseconds to 10 milliseconds. Okay, that's how fast things are going on in terms of the biology of your brain. If you're in the cognitive band, if you're building cognitive models, then you're looking at things that are happening on the order of 100 milliseconds, so 10 times per second, to maybe 10 seconds. Okay, so you can see thoughts. Those experiments that they showed looking at the brain are going to be somewhere in this time frame. Okay. The rational band is more along the lines of that exercise we did at the beginning, going through the steps, and that's why they call it the rational band. And those are things that are going to happen on the order of minutes and hours. Okay, so how do humans behave on the order of minutes and hours? How do humans behave on the order of a second or two? How do humans behave on the order of fractions of seconds? And then the social band, which we talked about, is more macro and level. So when you had your assignment that you still haven't all turned in, you can see why there really can be a lot of variability in terms of the model that you choose, you know, because there's lots of variables that you can consider in terms of how you want to constrain time, for example. Okay. This is just a traditional, I call it a traditional model for how we think and act, okay? And basically it you know, it's a simplification, but it assumes that we have two kinds of memory in this model. Really, there's a lot more kinds of memories that we have, but for this model, there's, I'm sorry, 3 types of memories. Here we have at the top, we have declarative long-term memory, and we have procedural long-term memory. Declarative long-term memory is declarative. It's things like facts, okay? So you can see in the picture there, there's a map. Okay, so if you knew the states and their capitals or the towns in Puerto Rico, those would be facts. Procedural long-term memory is the memory that we use to keep track of how to do things, how to walk, how to run, how to play tennis. Short-term memory is the memory that we can kind of keep track of. It's, a lot of people say it's our conscious. It's what when we say we're subconscious memory, it's memories that are not in our consciousness. So that kind of memory tends to be things that we're thinking about right now. It's what allows me to have an idea and then communicate that idea to you over some amount of time. Okay. So here in this model, which is a generic model, we have something that's happening down here. There's a perception of it, either through the eyes or through the ears in this model. It's going into our short-term memory. And then we're accessing our knowledge of facts, and we're accessing our knowledge of how to do things in order to actually do things, to create some action on something that's happening down here. Then it shows a couple of other links here. One is declarative learning, because one of the things we may perceive may be a new fact. Maybe it's a fact we want to remember, like the definition that we're going to use in class of artificial general intelligence being associated with something that's characteristic by having its wisdom, right? So that might be something that we want to get in here so that the next time we need to access that on a homework or a quiz or on the exam, that we're able to access it, right? In that case, we're going to read the question. We're going to know about what the question is. And we're going to access declarative learning to get that answer. And then we're going to take an action based on procedure to write that down or type it into computers. So this is one of many perfectly acceptable models for how humans can observe and respond to tasks. And this down here is just showing that that can happen over and over again. I can see we're going to run out of time. So I'm going to skip this. And we got a little more time. I'm not going to skip it. I'm just going to go through it quickly. Okay. You'll be able to see these slides because they're going to be on Moodle. So I'll upload them. Okay. Other ways we can create models is we can observe things. So this is work that's going on in AGI. So when you hear me say AGI, that's what I'm talking about, artificial general intelligence. This work is at MIT, where they're observing children in different situations and using those observations to try to build models. And one of the things that these researchers believe is that that young kids, even at the age that you can see here, have some intuition about physics, but they know that if they throw something up, it's going to come down. Okay, so they're thinking that models, that their models need to include some physics intuition engines to kind of help AI, so that AI might have an answer, but they want to sort of assist AI in an AGI because they know that humans have some natural intuition about physics. Okay, so maybe the solution is coupling some deep learning with some physics intuition, right? Maybe some heuristics intuition, common sense intuition engines as part of a software program. I'm not going to go into that. This is taking that to a case where they can implement it. This is for vision. You can't read that here, but you'll be able to read it online. So they're envisioning creating a brain operating system that would be implemented in a computer that would have a working memory, would have a memory of visual routines, and would be able to respond to things that promote attention. And then a cognitive core, and here's where they would put the intuitive physics, okay? They also have here geometry and intuitive psychology. So again, looking at how do we create modules, software modules, similar to what you saw in Sophia, right? Where you can say, okay, I think this is happening, but maybe 10 other things are happening. I need my intuitive physics, engine to tell me what is likely to be reality, okay? To help me choose between things. That's a much more complicated model. This is a very complicated model, but you can look at those online. And those will be available tomorrow, so they won't be available today. This is a very simple model. It's actually in a discipline that's associated with psychiatry that helps people understand the interrelationships between three things, okay? Which is basically thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. What this is that I have thoughts, and those thoughts can influence my behaviors, or they can influence my emotions. And I have emotions, and those emotions can influence my thoughts or my behaviors. And that all these sort of coexist at the same time. Okay. So one of the key questions of this is, and I alluded to it a little bit, is can software and hardware be combined to achieve wisdom? Right, that's when I commented that one of the definitions said, well, it's software that does this. Another one says, well, it's a computer that does this. We don't know the answers to that question. which begs the question, well, if you don't limit it to software and you don't limit it to computers, can some form of artificial and general intelligence be engineering? Okay, so we need to think about that. Obviously, I think that it can. And I think that, that what we're going through in this class is going to help you as you think about how we would implement a system that's wise. Okay. Okay. So tonight before midnight, you're going to turn in the homework. If you haven't already, you've been given this book. We're going to read now the introduction in chapter 1. Okay. So introduction, chapter 1 are probably going to have something to do with your next homework, which I'm not going to assign you. So you have some time if you don't want to read it right away. You don't have to. We're not going to cover the introduction in chapter 1 in the next class. Okay, so you don't need it to better understand the next class. If you did, I would tell you that you would understand the next class better if you read it, right? But in this case, you're not. So feel free not to read it between now and next class, which is only on Wednesday. We actually have 2 classes this week. Okay. When you read this book, and we're not going to read the whole book, so don't worry about it. The book's big, the letters are small. Right now, the reading assignment is just going to be the introduction, which is just, I don't even know, 3 or 4 pages, I think, and then chapter 1, okay? But when you read it, it's going to talk about this guy, and that's why I wanted to save 3 minutes, which we have, to show you 3 minutes worth of video here.
Okay, so when you read the book, she's going to refer to this speech. And so I thought it'd be good before you even read the book, or even if you had to actually hear the speech. Okay. We're not going to hear the whole speech. We're just going to hear 3 minutes of the speech. It's very important that you listen very carefully, and that's why I got this here. Hopefully it's not too loud. So we'll listen all the way to 6, which is going to take us a little bit before the end of class. So. This is the governor of Connecticut in 2013.
You were tested by unimaginable tragedy. Your compassion and your leadership over the past month has been an inspiration to Connecticut and to me personally. It will not surprise anyone here tonight or today that this speech is very different from the one that I first envisioned giving. In the early days of December, I began thinking about what I'd like to say today. Now, while it's only been a few short weeks on the calendar, we have all walked a very long and very dark road together. What befell Newtown is not something that we thought possible in any Connecticut beautiful small town or our cities. And yet, in the midst of one of the worst days in our history, we also saw the best of our state. Teachers and a therapist that sacrificed their lives protecting the students. A principal and school psychologist that ran into harm's way. Our brave Connecticut state troopers, Newtown's local law enforcement and firemen, and the others that responded courageously when called. Sorry. In the aftermath, a select woman, a superintendent, and other local officials have served around the clock, bringing comfort and stability to Newtown. And today, Sandy Hook's teachers are doing what they do best, putting the interests of their students first as they return to classrooms, and providing stability and continuity that has never been so important and so needed as it is today. And then, of course, there are the 26 families. The families that, despite unimaginable loss, have gotten up each and every day since that happened, and have been there for one another and have supported their communities as much as those communities have supported them. They have persevered, and in that perseverance, we should all find strength. We have lifted one another up and continued carrying up the spirit of our fallen heroes and our wounded families and our beautiful lost children. As a state and as a community, we will continue to do whatever we can for the families of Newtown. But we must also ask ourselves, what is our responsibility? To those we've lost, to one another, to the children, and to future generations. During this legislative session, we're going to begin to answer those questions together. Let us do everything in our power to ensure that Connecticut never again suffers a loss such as this.
That's all I have for today. It's a little bit of a sad note that when you read the book, you'll really understand. So she's going to start talking about this guy and this speech.